today we're talking about writing for media, and that can mean podcasts, interview shows, YouTube channels, whatever that might look like for your team. So, the reason I want to talk about this is because many, if not most, content marketers are coming from a background that's deeply rooted in writing, and it makes a ton of sense why that is. So, when we spoke about content for the better half of the past 3 decades or so, largely what we were talking about were blog posts and blog content. But now formats are evolving, right? We're seeing videos, we're seeing podcasts, we're seeing a lot of kind of interview based shows. And again, this is kind of the shift toward media and becoming a media hub, becoming a media brand. And so while we might get stretched thin to help aid production for those other formats, the truth is that for most of us, our main wheelhouse as content marketers is writing. So, what role do we play moving forward in supporting these new formats? I think this is a really interesting conversation because there are so many different ways that we can leverage this expertise with kind of writing and editing and being on the editorial side of things. And there definitely is a place for content marketers within this new landscape that we're getting into now. And I think the idea here is that we're largely doubling down on the strengths that we already have. So I want to kind of talk through what this looks like at different stages of production, and how content marketers can lean into their writing experience and use that in these new formats. So let's start at the beginning with the pre-production phase. So a couple of ways that these writing skills can be leveraged and put to good use are things like building an editorial calendar. This is something that a lot of us have had to do. It's just been kind of part of a blog effort. And so now this can be evolving to encompass more formats. So developing the plan and then delegating to the appropriate specialist. That might be in-house people who have specific product expertise. It might be subject matter experts. It might be freelancers, whatever it is. This new role is more of like an head of editorial or marketing lead or editor-in-chief, however you kind of want to title that. The other thing is helping with research and screening potential guests and doing things like authoring scripts and coming up with relevant interview questions. So in doing this, we get to leverage our product knowledge and we get to tap into the audience pain points that we know about and make sure that the content is hyper relevant regardless of the format. We also can get into the nuance of topics because we know the subject matter really well, and we can relate things back to our niche or our industry to make sure that there's enough depth and breadth of a topic. So it's quality, it's worthwhile for viewers. The same thing that you would do with writing blog posts or coming up with topics. You want to make sure that writers are going deep enough for it to be really valuable for the audience. Other things, we can tap into our journalistic curiosity to develop the right interview questions for the right guests. We can build a story arc that keeps an interesting narrative thread throughout these more visual first formats, so it's not kind of lost in the mix. I think one thing that's really easy to slip into is you get into kind of the flashy dynamics of a YouTube show where you can do a lot of cuts or fun graphics and things like that. And sometimes the story arc can get lost in all of that. Because there is so much you can do with production. But by tapping into that writer sensibility, this is where a marketing lead really has an opportunity to leverage those strengths. And I think also we can help ensure that there's consistency across brand voice and tone and doing things like that make that easier. So things like developing briefing documents, coming up with some background information for people who are going to be working on different things. So all of this is part of pre-production, and this is all tied back to those editorial writing skills. And so the next phase of this then is execution. Once it's time to actually execute on the work, what role do we have there? A couple of things come to mind. Overseeing things like quality control, touched on that a little bit just a moment ago, but acting as the editorial lead who oversees various content arms while operating individually but as part of a whole. Experimenting with different formats, approaches, tactics, and then recording those findings to share with leadership teams for future planning. So again, kind of acting as that one point of contact for all these different inputs and people working on different projects, different formats, things like that. And then ensuring content and brand alignment. So someone has to oversee all of these different moving parts and make sure it all works together towards the big picture goals. Again, this is where that editorial kind of function really comes into play. There has to be a point person to make sure that you don't just have a bunch of pieces of content being produced and there's no clear big picture objective, right? And then finally, we have distribution. So the final piece of the puzzle when it comes to content production is, content marketers really understand our channel impact better than anyone. So what we can do is help devise a plan in order to distribute content, regardless of format, through owned and rented channels in order to drive impact and return on investment and all of those important things that leadership care about. So that might mean doing things like monitoring cross-channel success, making data informed decisions. This is where the marketer side comes into play. You get to tap into, okay, we have all this information on how these different things are performing, what's working, what's not, what can we do differently, what can we do better. Looking for collaborative opportunities with influencers, thought leaders, subject matter experts in your space. So that might even mean creators. How do you tap into different people who can speak to different topics, offer new perspective, and also add some potential for additional organic reach? Because sometimes when people are mentioned in a post or a video or a podcast interview, they're happy to share it. So looking for relevant people to partner with. And then thinking about repackaging. This is a big one. So you have all this content, you're working across all these various channels. How can you repackage that and repurpose it into new formats for greater longevity of the existing content that you have? I think that this is a big piece of the puzzle, and we're going to get into this in a future episode. But again, this distribution piece is a big part of making sure that content, no matter what channel it's being produced on, is successful and is seen and is talked about and is engaged with, right? So it's one thing to produce and to do the research and to do the heavy lifting, but then you have to get it out